Oh, I got something for your ass.
This is the clue that's gonna solve the crime, officer?
Oh, you could say that. You know, I was thinking about this song I heard on the radio the other day, Sam. It's a song that made me think of you. Turns out it's pretty popular. How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must the white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Woo! I just love those lyrics, especially in the beginning. How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? This is always asking how much do the oppressed have to do before they can be recognized as human beings. That really gets you thinking, don't it?
I already know Blowing in the Wind, Malcolm. I heard it when it first came out.
It didn't make you angry?
Why would it?
When this Bob Dylan fella, a white boy from Minnesota.
So what?
So? This is a white boy from Minnesota who has nothing to gain from writing a song that speaks more to the struggles of our people, more to the movement than anything that you have ever penned in your life, brother. I know I'm not the shrewd business person you are, my brother, but since you say being vocal in the struggle's bad for business, why's this old song going higher on the pop charts than anything you got out?
And that is a scene from a movie that was One Night in Miami. We were supposed to watch that movie, not collectively, but my co-host and I were supposed to watch that movie and comment on it. And I believe my co-host did not watch that movie. So I'm going to be periodically throwing clips of that movie in so he can watch it. Just the good parts. My co-host that I speak of, if you don't know him, he is a writer for Huffington, Black Agenda Report, and he has a book that he has to finish, hopefully coming out on Zero Books. Pascal Robert.
What's going on, brother Jason?
Afternoon.
Afternoon. That is
I don't
correct.
even want to. I don't even want to
I didn't
wait.
say morning.
I'm saying afternoon to you. It's morning as hell over here.
That's true because you are in the Bay. You are in the Bay. I watched that. I just watched that segment, and I gotta agree with you, man. The Malcolm X character comes off soft as baby shit, man.
Is he like Barack Obama playing Malcolm X? So today, we're gonna have a friend on for Saturday, and I think I want to make this a regular thing. This is the only time this gentleman has free. He is a co-host of an extremely successful show on Twitch, the Left Flank Vets. He is a post 9/11 combat veteran. He's also colored. His name is Marcus.
Oh, colored.
Speaking of colored, I thought that was Justin Trudeau playing Malcolm.
Wow.
Was that not? That one?
So my girl, hey. So if you guys see this name right here, Joel Skulls in the chat, this is my younger brother. Shout out Joel. Morning, bro. Haven't seen you in a minute. This pandemic's a bitch. Riverman says that scene was sad. That scene in the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, basically the Sam Cooke character, and that guy could sing his ass off, actually did a great Sam Cooke impersonation. He's basically saying that Malcolm X is bad for business with his talk of the struggle and revolution, and that he's making all this money, and his writers are making all this money off these white artists that are taking black music. And then Malcolm X, and then he started calling out Elijah Muhammad and the Nation, and saying that Elijah Muhammad is getting rich off poor black people and not condemning the bad practices of black politicians in the black community in Chicago, for example, where the Nation, I believe, is headquartered, right?
It is.
Yeah. Is it still headquartered? And so Malcolm X understands this at this point of his life. This movie is supposed to take place literally, actually right before both of them die. Sam Cooke is killed by a hooker in a hotel the next year. And of course, we know Malcolm X is assassinated. And so Malcolm X, for some reason, goes and plays Bob Dylan because, you know, of course, a 38-year-old man is really doing the Watusi to Bob Dylan in 1964. And in the movie, he calls out the Sam Cooke character. And at the end of the movie, the Sam Cooke character is like, I got this song about revolution. And it's what is his big hit? I was born by the river. What is the name of that song?
Change Gonna Come?
Yeah, Change Gonna Come. Which is it's a sweet little ending. So it's, but yeah, that is that movie, and I couldn't. So my girl and I are watching it, and we're trying to get into it, and I just keep looking at her. I'm like, I can't watch this because this guy is too much Malcolm X, dude. too much of Barack Obama as Malcolm X. I just can't get into it.
I mean, the one response that I have to you is that as many times as we are on the show and you talk about popular culture and how much I try to avoid it because it triggers me. I said, I would tell you it triggers my neuroses. You just proved why I stick to that methodology by showing me this video, man. Because again, you know my whole thing, right? In terms of how media is a ruling class tool of building social consensus. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, some may call it social engineering or what have you. Mm-hmm. But the larger point is that I don't tend to enjoy these kind of depictions because I know as much as people think that they are not politicized, that's not true. They are about building a certain consensus about historical periods of time and moments in history to fulfill a certain kind of agenda of, you know, this is a nice, and it depoliticizes these individuals, it de-radicalizes them, and they make them a piece of American popcorn. And I think that process is nefarious. I don't think it's something that, and I don't think it's a good way to educate our progeny about those historical moments. And I think that people who are interested in radical politics or have any affection for them would recognize this type of pablum for exactly what it is. And I think it's actually dangerous to the politics of those who are sincere to the activism of that particular moment in time.
Yeah, I have to agree, like 100%. Like to say that if we can look at the broader, like higher level thing of just like the way, you know, imperialists, capitalists, white supremacists, whatever you want to call them, utilize media to hurt the movements, right? That will ultimately, you know, just hurt their own profits. But how do they do that? And like, first you could say they demonize, and like, you know, I'd say when I was first growing up, Malcolm X was something that was very like almost taboo of sorts. And then you could see them revamping it now into what we just saw as like some type of, as like the pacification of Malcolm X, as to where you like, are they trying to now force him into not like the MLK role, like that, or at least what their idea of what MLK was, of just hey, you know, just be peaceful and we'll eventually get there. So I don't know. It's just kind of like it's just a way to repackage, Black history in order to serve their own purpose.
By the way,
and it's February, so we're getting a bunch of that, right? Like I saw a commercial recently. I can't remember what product it was for, and it started off with a close up of Martin Luther King's face, and it was like he was a man of peace. And then it went to some other Black guy, and he was some other docile figure. That is.
I mean, this is a question I'm actually planning on trying to work on a piece about this today over the weekend. Maybe I want to try to get it published in the next issue of Black Agenda Report. Mm-hmm. And the ultimate question of the piece that I want to ask, and I think we can have this conversation, is the purpose of the quote unquote Black liberation struggle, and people have a problem with that term for various reasons, ultimately to be reconciled with American exceptionalism. In other words, the question I want to ask is that the history of struggle, of various struggles that Black Americans have gone through to improve their conditions in this country, we can go back to the slave rebellions. We can go back, we can go as many different manifestations. You want Reconstruction. You could talk about the populist era. We could talk about all of the iterations of the various means and mechanisms and social formations that Black people in America have challenged the oppressive means and ways in which America has categorized them in the society. Is the ultimate function of that history to be able to simply take Black people and put them in the garb of American empire and just say USA, and fall into the 20th century notion of American exceptionalism that is primarily premised on using imperialism to buttress the notion that America is the shining city on the hill. And ultimately, my position is that there are some Black people who do want that. When I look at Time magazine, and they have the young woman who was a poet who gave the inauguration poet for Joe Biden, and I see
youngest poet laureate.
Yes, I see a piece by Ibraham X Kendi talking about the Black Renaissance, and everyone's talking about pearls and chucks because of Kamala Harris. I am realizing, right, particularly since the rise of Obama, that there are a segment of Black people, particularly Black elites, who indeed want to reconcile the history of Black people in America challenging the status quo with American exceptionalism. And my question is, are we going to allow that to go about sitting on our hands and not challenge that as those who consider ourselves, quote unquote, on the Black left, or some would say adherents to the Black radical tradition, or those who are at least interested in oppositional politics? Like, maybe I am being over alarmist, but is it not disturbing to see Black resistance history, or the history of Black people in America particularly, being rendered to validate empire in its functionality? I'd like you gentlemen to tell me. Maybe I'm being overly paranoid. What are your thoughts?
I was actually going to get into that, because that whole piece, the Black Renaissance piece, and we have gone back and forth, Pascal, about this, and Marcus, I don't know if you and I really have delved deep into it when we do our Tuesday morning show. Also, shout out to Left Flank Vets. Marcus and I have Black Tuesdays. Black Tuesdays.
It's like so far I think we've gotten to like Black dudes talking shit, and Blackiavelli have been like some of the names tossed around.
But this what Pascal is talking about is actually just kind of highly frustrating because even beyond pearls and chucks, I didn't think that poem was really that wonderful.
As poems go, yeah.
As poems go, I thought she was a child, actually. Sorry. And I was like, oh, this is good, I guess, for like a kid. And then when they're like, oh no, she's like 22, I was like, oh, you're a freaking adult. And I read a little bit of Ibrahim Kendi's piece in Time. Riverman says the inaugural poem from what I read of it was bad as the ugly large headband on her. The vibe felt a lot like a return to 2008 and a return to like we've checked all the boxes of what's okay and I'm kind of adding on to Pascal's shining city on a hill. We have the black president and we have this happy white man to be sitting next to this black man. And, you know, we avoided Joe Biden's record for 8 years as a senator. And now I think people are a little more aware of his record. I don't know how good of a seller Bronco Market Checks Yesterday's Man book actually was, but it's an amazing book if you want to know about the rightward shift of the Democratic Party, which is really what it also shows you, and also Joe Biden's zeal to be where he is now as president. And the multicolored cabinet is very, very frustrating because it's, you know, it's full of Obama era people that got higher positions now. So Empire just has a different face, I feel like.
I guess that if I could try and answer what Pascal was saying or the question, I think it may be just an extension to what the Obama administration was just fitting, that idea of the shining city on the hill, and jamming that black liberation round peg into the square hole, and because that's what we see by the end of Obama, it's kind of difficult for most Americans to even see that, well, yes, things are still just as bad, if not worse, right? You need to go back to the like late 50s and 60s to find a rival time as far as like school segregations and then stuff like that. So yeah, I don't think you're being too alarmist when you say some of the things that are going on as far as, whether it's the inauguration, some of the messaging that goes around the cabinet picks. I mean, Lloyd Austin, for one, I'm not sure that it matters that you have a black defense secretary when he is one of many defense secretaries that have been on the board of defense contractors or tightly tied to him. So yeah, I think that would be a continuation. As soon as they could say, hey, we can't force black people out, it just became a thought process of how do we make black people serve our own interests, which I don't know, I guess that loops back to your own argument of the black politics is class politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And X Kendi's from what little bit. Oh, shout out Discord. Were you on Discord, Marcus? Is it Discord?
Yeah, I threw it out in our Discord. Just that, hey, I'm on and I'm talking with some brothers that are a lot smarter than me. So I told them, like, come watch me learn something.
I'm not gonna say that. Especially, I was telling Pascal.
I only learned style from you.
Shit. You got old fucking punk dude style then. I was telling Pascal about you actually last night, and I was like, Marcus is a lot more in tune with electoral politics than Pascal actually is pretty in tune with electoral politics, but it's not something that we dwell on too much, because I feel like it's becoming the hill that a lot of people seem to be wanting to die on is electoral politics and not really go beyond that. Like, we can't see change beyond the squad, if that means anything. And kind of mildly changing the subject, there was a really interesting piece in the LA Times on the headline that evictions are still going on, and there were 14,000 evictions last year, 2020, in LA County alone. So we're supposed to have a federal moratorium on evictions, and then we had a very extremely titular state moratorium on evictions, and the courts are still open even for traffic cases. So what the article was talking about was that people are dying in court. I don't know if judges have died, but a lot of like court reporters have died, and it was really sad. Interpreters have died from COVID, and these are things that they feel they can do remotely, but nope, eviction still got to happen. Because you got to go to court in California. You have to go to court even to prove that COVID is causing you to not be able to pay your rent, to be part of having the moratorium so you don't get evicted. Pascal often talks about the army of surplus labor. And oh, yeah, someone said there's loopholes with the yeah, it's not even like loopholes. The moratorium in California might have been 4 lines long. It wasn't very, very strict. But with the army of surplus labor that we talk about so much, and the fact that births are down, Mitt Romney was suggesting in his bailout plan that he give poor people so much money with children to keep having children.
I saw that.
What was your, like, how do you guys feel about that? Are we literally just sending are we all capitalism sacrificial lambs?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's always the case, but I mean, the larger point is that Mitt Romney, Mr. 47%, this is the guy who said that only 47% of the people are actually, quote unquote, contributing in 2012 when he was running against Obama, is now talking about having the state cut out checks of $350 per child for American families who are facing poverty. That the question becomes that is Mitt Romney admitting that American capitalism is failing, or is Mitt Romney trying to configure a way to mitigate the bleeding so that we can have, a surplus redundant army of labor be relegated to basic subsistence while denying them any other state services and saying, hey, we gave you your $350 a kid. What are you complaining about?
What do you complain? So I got into it with my brother-in-law, who actually very, very, very smart guy. And he felt like, well, the Republicans are taking the ball and running with it, and this is such a wonderful thing, and I'm not going to be partisan on this. And I was like, dude, it's not about being partisan. Like, this sounds like some evil villain Dr. Mindbender shit.
We'll pay the poor people more to keep fucking.
it shouldn't be partisan to just understand like policy. But I don't know. Kind of to even go back, it's like I focus on electoral politics because like that's just where my passions lie. Like systems of government, how they work, the relation to just everyday people. It's just something that like I wake up and that's the shit that I want to do. But understanding that like that just is a very minor slice of the pie as far as like movement building and yeah. So with that though, yes, we need to just I do feel like the electorate as a whole needs to be able to just say, is this good or bad, and figure out ways to delve with that, because it's just a fact that all politicians, they know what socialism is. They know what actual like populist policy. They know what these things are. They know how popular they are, and they know that they don't have to utilize them until it becomes specifically necessary, and they will do so in a way that is, like Mitt Romney shows here, absolutely evil. It's just disgusting. And and this is something too. It's like I'll go both sides on this, right? Because it's not just Romney. It's almost the complete spectrum of our federal politics for sure. Where these people will wait till there's the brink, and they'll figure out what little pressure valve they can release. But it's only to serve themselves, right? To get elected, get reelected, so that they can keep the corporate donors happy. And like it's just a regurgitation of that. And I would say any even influx in religion is also in service of that as well.
I'm sorry, I missed some of that because my son has a drum set and he decided to go ham on it.
Whatever Phoenix is doing is more important than what I'm saying. It's all
right. Sometimes, but right now I had to close the door because I'm like, you black little son of a bitch. What's your take on the whole thing, Pascal? As far as
listen, my whole thing is that like, what is the ultimate? I mean, the idea of providing subsidies to parents in need in a time of crisis, or at all, frankly, in and of itself, is not a bad idea. Like, my politics are the politics that wealth should be distributed towards the poor and working class, away from those who hoard the wealth, and the means of production should be put forth in the hands of the majority. Okay, so in and of itself, the concept of giving a subsidy to those in need for childcare, in and of itself, the idea is not nefarious. What becomes questionable to me is that when you look at the political history of the individuals who are proposing this, and you understand that they have agendas that have historically not been interested or worked at the behest of poor and working class families in American society, you begin to understand that perhaps the suggestion of this policy is not about giving some types of capacity to survive to poor people, but in a way to actually cut their capacity to receive state benefits in other avenues, i.e., is this a poison pill to open the door to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid reform, or cutting other services, or denying them, subsidies for Section 8 housing, or a variety of other services that they may need. In other words, how does this become a workaround for other budgetary measures in which the social welfare state that barely functions to help those individuals may get eviscerated? For me, my larger response is that why aren't we talking about finding a means to take the quote unquote billionaire class of American society and give those who are not being able to be employed in our society currently shares in the enterprise of American capitalism, so that they actually become owners of wealth in the distribution of wealth and resources and become stakeholders in that system as a means. If the technology is supposed to make it more able for society overall to function, and what work is going to become obsolete, then why don't you give every American citizen ownership in the means of production? Give them ownership shares in the corporations. Give them ownership in or distribute partial of the GDP to American society. That to me is about redistribution of wealth and giving everybody a quality of life, not just cutting a check so that people are going to be able to have other services potentially cut. You guys following what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And well, we can't do that in the United States because that's socialism, and socialism is bad. and we need to spread freedom and democracy across the world or something. Like that's just, and even so, looking at what goes on in the United States, i.e., you have billionaires like Mike Bloomberg, who are the direct causes of destruction. It was laid to bear for the nation during the debates.
Yeah. Bloomberg and Tom Steyer on the same stage, two billionaires.
Not 2 days ago, he is preaching that teachers and children need to risk their lives to go back to work. And why is he saying that? It's not because he cares about kids. It's not because he cares about teachers doing their job. It's because the means of production are in his hands. And also the means of media. He owns his own media corporation, and then is also able to go on other media, large media conglomerates and speak to his desires in a way that is being I guess sold as America's greatness, because part of that shining city on the hill is the fake belief that you could also become a Bloomberg.
That's so true. That is so true. That's all you got? When you see me typing, you're supposed to keep going so I can finish responding to these people. That's why you're here, man, so I can respond to the people.
Sometimes we just got to think.
I think that the question really becomes, right, is that in the current crisis of capitalism that we're seeing in America, the ultimate question for me is are the lords of capital going to take this as an opportunity to restructure capitalism in a way that's going to pauperize the majority of Americans even further and further facilitate wealth accrual of wealth upward to the 1%? And my position is I don't see why. I don't know why we should expect otherwise when the whole purpose of the economic model that we live in is wealth accumulation going upward. Largely, the concept of having a quote unquote stable middle class in America is a very relatively new concept. That's a New Deal kind of Keynesian consensus that comes about with FDR. Before that, there was no interest in having a large, broad, stable middle class. America was a very balkanized society with a small tier of wealthy elites and most people living profoundly poor, miserable lives, whether it will be in urban environments or in the Dust Bowl or or plantation economies. This notion of the stable middle class and 2.5 kids in the suburbs and a white picket fence. This is all part of the way in which capitalism propagated itself ideologically when the United States was able to take its place as the economic engine of global capitalism after World War II. That's a very small period of time. And what we see after about a 25, 30-year period in which that paradigm is allowed to function is that it becomes evident that, starting with the 70s and over the period of what I call this 50-year counter-revolution, capitalism is constantly in crisis, it's in flux, it's not stable. And the ability to replicate that kind of stable middle class kind of, period because of New Deal development that, of course, was racialized in a way that, large numbers of Black Americans couldn't benefit from, that we don't really have a time in which American capitalism is giving this overall kind of security. So the question then becomes is that if this illusion of a capitalist economy is not providing that same kind of illusion of security, remember, whenever you hear these right-wing conservatives talking about, America was wonderful, they always talk about the 50s. They never tell you that the 50s was basically an economy that was structured under New Deal largesse, and that the top marginal tax rate was over 85%.
91% during the
91%. Yeah, exactly. No one tells you about that.
No, they never talk about that, and it's so funny because that's like the whole project was to destroy those New Deal programs, right? Especially when we see Reagan
Right.
come in the 60s as a governor.
I don't know if Marcus has watched that. Jason and I mentioned this documentary from Showtime often on the Reagans, but which I think we both would agree it's a very good documentary.
Very good documentary.
But what is the most fascinating lesson from that documentary for me is that Reagan and his generation of conservatives that come about after the 60s, all of them, their childhood and teenage and young adult years were all subsidized by New Deal government largesse.
Yeah. Reagan was a Democrat, and his family were like big time New Deal Democrats.
Okay.
Well, I mean, he was born out of the Hollywood elite that the Republicans claim to hate, but you see,
he was a tool of
yeah. Well, and that's where this is like a continuing thing, or at least partly what I see as well is like when you look at Trump, this is a dude that spent the majority of his life shitting on gold toilets, and that's not hyperbole. And so I like that's something that's like I don't that's like if we're talking about things that like that just rack my brain, is how does even like the Republican Party, which is like the fake like white working class, right? Like they it's all just it's all just narrative, but how they could even look at that dude and be like, that's the guy.
Well, I mean, I think that the larger question is that how much do people become disgusted and distrustful of the Democratic Party to the point where they see him as an option? In other words, the rise of the new Democrats with Clinton and think about NAFTA, GATT, the deindustrialization,
third way politics,
third way, the rise of hardcore Democratic version of neoliberalism, deregulating of Glass-Steagall. I mean, the hyper neoliberalization of finance capital. Robert Rubin's whole, machinations as Secretary of Treasury that give birth to the economics that lead to the 2008 crash. So why does it become surprising that millions of Americans, when they see Hillary Clinton, who is, kind of, the wife of, the titular head of that politics, trying to claim the mantle of American president, they're like, hell no, not this woman. Are you anybody but them? What becomes fascinating, right? And we got to remember this. This is how much many liberals are stuck in this box. Like, there are many liberals today who don't understand why regular non-right-wing people don't like the Clintons. They don't get it. They don't understand. They think the Clintons saved the Democratic Party. And they don't understand that in the eyes of large numbers of Americans, the Clintons helped facilitate the bipartisan consensus that wreaked havoc economically on this country. Yeah.
And I don't think it can be like overstated that especially with Hillary's run, that should just be looked at as malpractice, political malpractice. If you had any other profession and said, hey, we need you to just do this thing, right? Like as far as like just running a political campaign, regardless of ideology, you would say these people not only did not do their job, but did such a bad job that they should be held legally responsible for how bad they did. So to go to Hillary Clinton, there were more Democratic down ticket votes in Michigan, somewhere up with 30,000 ballots in Michigan, where they voted the whole ticket Democrat and left the top completely blank. Why would people do that? because Hillary Clinton, the Clinton campaign went to Flint and they paid lip service and they tried to use those people as a political prop. You know, and like that's just something that's like that's the cap, right? That's the tip of the iceberg. What is the iceberg? What Pascal was just mentioning. All of the Clinton third way politics that have just decades long decimated and not even just continued, you know, the fake revival that the Democratic Party keeps spouting. And yeah, I don't know if I'm just adding in some extra.
No, these are very good points. It's very important. It's very important. So now we're at this point now, right? We have Joe Biden and many people. I have personal friends who believe that Joe Biden is going to be returning to a brighter version of empire, particularly on the foreign policy front. People think that, for those who believe into international liberalism, or some people call globalization, that Joe Biden is going to be a greater friend to globalization than Trump by any stretch of the imagination. That some people are saying that Biden is looking like he's not going to be governing with austerity. But the larger point of the matter is that this constant theme that we're seeing, particularly people on the left and the middle, thing is like, oh, Trump is a fascist, Trump, blah, blah. I mean, I'm not even so much interested in the debate of whether or not Trump is or is not a fascist. I think that debate is kind of a waste of time, because Trump came about because of a crisis of American politics. And what's more interesting to me is to ask, what is the crisis of American politics that made Trump possible? And one of the problems with simply talking about debating how much of a fascist Trump is that it allows you to get away from the larger and more important debate in terms of what went wrong in the politics in this country that allows Trump to rise in the first place. And if you can't do that without indicting the utility of the Democratic Party to becoming an arm of finance capital in this country in the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, no, I 100%. Because I think I agree that if it's worthless to talk about Trump as a fascist if we cannot talk about George W. Bush as a fascist. If we cannot, and not just trying to throw around these words, but it's like when we talk about like these authoritarian things, how they come about, and the dangers of them.
What also part of the danger of this process, I find, right, in that it really, when we see the kind of absurd right-wing trajectory and evolution of the right in America, that kind of goes from Nixon law and order, that goes to Reagan with Make America Great, that goes to Bush and the war on terror, and it goes again to even further with Trump and Make America Great Part 2. It's very easy for the liberal elite in American media to paint that as some kind of right-wing aberration. Look at the right; they're just crazy. Oh my God!
Yeah.
And to act as if that movement along that rightward shift of American political discourse has been partisan on one side of the aisle and has not been enabled by liberal policies coming out of the New Democrats with the rise of third way politics, with the rise of Clintonianism, Tony Blairism, with the rise of all of that.
Well, I think
by the way, we can argue that it goes back to Jimmy Carter. As a matter of fact, he was not exactly a friend of labor either.
No, right. And I think if Jimmy Carter would have stood stronger on some of what you see, kind of his moral capabilities that he has now, maybe that wouldn't have let the Democratic Party fully slide. But at that point, you needed a strong leftist in order to stop the ship at that point. And I think we all know that Jimmy Carter was not that.
Well, my position has always been that the post-civil rights posture of American politics has been a bipartisan consensus between Democrats and Republicans, between the left flank of Capitol and the right-wing flank of Capitol, that was decided because of certain realpolitik about what was going on with American global capitalism, the shift away from the gold standard, Bretton Woods, all of those kind of things, and the increasing of foreign competition that was coming along with the rise of Japan, Europe, the control, the manipulation of the control of oil production with Saudi Arabia and the oil protests, and all of these realities brought forth a consensus around neoliberalism that was bipartisan. It was not just the Democrats or Republicans. And in many ways, some of the worst extremes of that manifestation, though it started with Reagan, were actually carried out by Bill Clinton.
Yep.
Particularly NAFTA and GATT.
Yeah.
And that what we see with Trump is the ultimate culmination of that bipartisan consensus exploding in a way that the white quote unquote proletariat, if you will, or the white working class won't take it anymore. You know?
Yeah, and that's where I think that's where the dangers of Joe Biden kind of come in. That was the danger of you saw the dangers manifested with Obama. And I think, it's like with Biden, it's kind of like just it's getting off the highway just to do that exit loop, but you're just getting on that same direction. Because, and I served in the United States Marine Corps for 6 years. Every day, every second was under Barack Obama. Like there was 2 kinetic engagements that we were involved in, at least on a that was known. Iraq and Afghanistan. Barack Obama took that to 7 countries.
See, I want to push back against a comment here. Someone saying, simplify it, the GOP are white supremacist Nazis. What about the Democrats does not demonstrate that they are not white supremacists? What their carceral policy on mass incarceration, their treatment of black people in the post-civil rights era? I mean, when you say that the GOP are white supremacist Nazis, number one, do we actually believe that the whole GOP are white supremacist Nazis? And what exactly about the Democratic Party is not white supremacist? We look into particularly in terms of their foreign policy. So you're saying that because what you're telling
I was making that point right then of that like Barack Obama, if you can't explain to me how Africa Command, perfect example, that was Africa Command was stood up it was signed into law in 2007. It was one of the last things George Bush was able to sign one of the last laws he was able to sign his name on, right? Obama took AFRICOM was nothing. It was zero. It did not exist, right? It only existed on paper. And where are we at now? If you look at the amount of operations that we have going on the whole continent of Africa, and explain how that does not serve white supremacy because a black man did it. I agree with you 100%. Like, we could talk about the GOP all day. We could talk about Trump all day, but what does that serve? What good does that do? If we're just going to get back onto that highway, if we're just going to do the loop.
Now, again, what the Democrats seem to be offering to me is a more multicultural ruling class driving the Death Star than the Republicans, while the actual distribution of resources shrink more and more amongst a smaller elite.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like even it's like people look at some of the, progress, using progress as a completely relative term that Joe Biden is making on some issues, i.e. like having the $15 minimum wage and tying it to inflation. Have some of the completely just identity political issues as far as who and who can serve in certain government positions and everything like that. But going back to what I was saying earlier is that this only serves as a pressure valve, a release valve, to just make the politic in mass acceptable for the next Trump. And all of this does is serve white supremacy, serves capitalism, that however you want to, talk about the, like dialectical Marxism of what's going on in our lives today. But like the thing is that we have to realize that it's happening right now, every second, and then come up with the structures to change that.
Again, my position is not to make the argument that Trump does not particularly pose a certain that Trumpism, there's a certain noxious kind of reactionary, nationalist, racist tone to Trumpism. I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm not trying even to say that there aren't fascist elements within that coterie. I agree with that it exists there as well. What I'm saying is that acting as if all of the problems of American society that have transpired during this 50-year counter-revolution can be laid at the feet of Donald Trump is absolutely absurd and ahistorical. And if we don't interrogate how both sides of the aisle have helped get us to this position and challenge the status quo agenda that anyone's trying to present, that is not about trying to restructure the way in which our economy functions in terms of political economy to make this a more humane existence for most folk, then we're going to be looking at some real fascism real soon.
Okay, so I want to riff on that real quick because we've been talking for an hour. And I sent you guys all an article, and I think we all at some point have discussed it in different conversations that we had, privately. There's a bill that's being suggested in the state of Nevada that they want to create these innovation zones, which would allow tech companies to form their own governments, school systems, literal police forces, literal governing bodies in the desert, right? Because there's all
We've done this before, right? In this country, company towns, we've done this before. Yeah,
so my first thing was like, this is some Ayn Randian fantasy of a happy West Virginian mine in the in the early 1900s before they were really unionizing. And then you think about the bloody wars that literally happened when these guys were trying to, unionize. And I thought about Boots Riley's movie, Sorry to Bother You. And he uses an Amazon type company. He calls it Worry Free. And one of the kind of gags in the movie, right, is that they'll even let you live there. And it's basically slavery. So here we are in 2021 in a state that has no state tax is trying to entice more business to come down to Nevada under the guise of, we'll even fucking let you, like, F all the state tax and what other subsidies you get when you come down here. And I don't know if the average American knows how many subsidies companies like Walmart get as far as not paying sales tax and things like that. Payroll tax they avoid. And say, we'll let you set up your own fucking little Amazon land. And whatever you do in Amazon land, motherfucker, you just do it. And you want slaves? Have at it. Because you're going to have some. What was your guys' first take when you, and I'm also asking the people that are watching, remember this show is very interactive. What do you guys think? My brother's on screen with me. and the people that we're talking to, and my brother Joel's also watching it. Hopefully my brother-in-law Day is watching. What do you think when you hear shit like that? This isn't Twilight Zone we're talking about. This is now today a bill that's on the table that I feel like is going to get the Prop 22 treatment, where it's going to say, we're going to give you jobs. You're going to have more freedom because you're going to be outside of the law that limits you from your full earning potential with silly things like restrictions. So I think this is beyond the company town. I think the company town is passe with this. This is some new slavery shit. And I was talking to a woman for the audio podcast last night that actually is friends with the gentleman that broke the story that one of the first casualties of Proposition 22 in California, which was the delivery drivers for the union delivery drivers for the Vaughn's supermarket chain, which is a massive supermarket chain throughout Southern California, all were fired for gig workers, for app services. So this is the assault on labor is very, very real. And why your guys' conversation is so interesting to me about people's fixation on Trump, we always ignore the assault on labor that is a bipartisan assault. And if we call ourselves socialists, shouldn't we be concerned with this assault on labor?
Absolutely. I think it's the ultimate reality is, I think that we have to really come to an agreement here, is that labor obsolescence is the agenda. Making labor as we know it obsolete is the agenda of the new type of, some call the fourth industrial revolution, this stage of capitalism that we're in right now. And again, not to revert back to Marx, but this is classic. Marx admits that technology makes labor obsolete. Like, the owners of capital will always try to neutralize, mitigate, undervalue labor. This is part of the equation of capitalism. And what becomes the question that I don't see anyone asking is that, what exactly is the oppositional political response to the fact that we're living in the world where literally the lords of capital are trying to make labor obsolete? What is the opposition? Because I tell you right now, those who believe that Andrew Yang is the answer to the question, they think giving people $1,000 a month with no other kind of services or other kind of means of production or control or access to wealth accumulation is enough. And it seems like Mitt Romney might be agreeing with him.
Yeah, no, and that's like the mix of both of those things. And like I could understand, and I don't disagree with UBI as a transitional policy, because it does start to untether whatever someone does as a labor to the benefit of greater society and fulfillment of their life, does not have to correlate with their ability to live, feed themselves, educate themselves, all those things. But what Yang is doing is it's the bait and switch. And so there's a restriction, right? It's not universal. It's not a universal benefit. If there's a restriction to it, his only restriction is on poor people. And so Yang is definitely not the answer. And this kind of like capitalist technocrat, kind of in the light of Elizabeth Warren, who will proudly state, "I'm a capitalist to her bones." That type of politics, it's the type of thing that is just going to continue on allowing the buttresses up to fascism in this country, like Trump, continue on and on and on. And that's where you start to see it, and like to the point where like we just like say, hey, these super smart, or at least quote unquote super smart rich people that have these tech companies we should just let them rule over us. And you see it in New York, with some of the popularity of Yang having Bloomberg, even some of the policies of that they were trying to do to attract Amazon. We're kind of on the steps to what's going on in Nevada. But I would say, how do we battle back? Like focusing on labor specifically. Nevada has some of the strongest unions, especially in regards to the service industry in the nation. And so I think any chance of making like that specific bill in Nevada just go away would be highlighting and empowering the work that those labor unions have done. But they understand it too. It's like, this isn't going away. This isn't going away.
Well, also we got to keep in mind, like the labor unions. I can't remember which union it was. I know it was a casino dealers union. I can't remember exactly which one was pushing against Bernie Sanders because they knew Bernie Sanders ran on healthcare, and they were getting some sort of kickback, from healthcare for picking certain plans.
If that was the end of the story, I wouldn't have mentioned them. But the end of the story is that the unions were able to still organize, and Bernie Sanders won Nevada, won the Nevada caucus handily. So that's why I do put some faith in some of the labor unions in Nevada. But at the end of the day, those are one of the things, kind of just to loop it back to the overall theme of things. Mm-hmm. The destruction of labor unions is something that has been a bipartisanship effort, throughout. And so this is kind of something that, we do, we talk about this a lot on Left Flank. Is just about making sure that you're organizing in your community, whether that's a tenants union within the people who live in the same building as you, or, a labor union with the people who work. And there's, plenty of a place where you can go. IWW is a really easy one to kind of get like just some ideas and information. But at the end of the day, it's the people power, right? Like that's the continuing struggle. If we, pull back to the broader picture. Honestly, I'm just happy to be part of these conversations. That's hopefully, pushing it.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
So for those of you that don't know, I try to have as many people on as possible so I can do back end production things when I sleep in too late. So that's what's going on. And I'm going to play some of the Reagan documentary. So if for whatever reason the show gets pulled from YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, you can watch it on Twitch because it's an Amazon thing. I got it on Amazon. So
and actually, I do have a quick question though. The one thing too is that obviously I think that there's like there's a real danger as far as just like nefarious tech companies coming in, building some type of modern day, Skynet town. But I think there might be a greater danger, and I think that it might be kind of like in the guise of like Obama or like the black capitalism type of thing, where who's that dude, Deval Patrick,
former governor of Massachusetts?
Yes. If you get someone like him saying, "Oh, hey, come on, we're doing some good things over here," I think that would be my that's my fear.
In other words, using a kind of blackface Trojan horse to make this politics, this kind of new agenda, more appeasing. So a 2.0 version of the Obama shtick with a more appeasing kind of new charismatic. How do you think that do you think that model has run its course? I mean, I it's interesting. I don't think they totally shot their wad with the kind of like, diversity of empire thing. I think that's when I saw Pete Buttigieg run in the primary, I was like, okay, when I saw Buttigieg, Andrew Yang and all that, I was like, okay, this is the new thing. Is that like they're going with the, we are, we are the demons of diversity, kind of argument in terms of the ruling
That should be
class.
their name.
Yeah, the demons
The
of
demons
diversity.
of diversity. We need to give them that fuck.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody in the chat, that's what they're called from now on. When you
Demons
go
of Diversity,
chat
I
on
like
different shows and shit like that, it's the demons of diversity. Let's start calling them that shit.
I
Because
agree.
someone had said earlier on in the chat, and I was busy doing shit, and I couldn't respond about narratives. And that is why I always have Dr. Michael Harris on my show that wrote Welcome to the Rebellion and now his upcoming book, Stay Alive. Because there is no grand narrative on the left. Leftists just don't do the narrative thing. And because the right wing, I don't want to say just Republicans, the right wing are so good at narratives because there's narratives overly simplify shit, right? And we're the context people.
Well, for me, I use my grand narrative. I say it a lot on this show, and Jason's familiar with it. I call it the 50-year counter-revolution, and I think that should be a grand narrative.
Or we can call it white reconstruction. Shout out to Dylan.
I think that for me, the reason why I use this 50-year counter-revolution, right, is that it contextualizes this in time, in that pretty much after the Civil Rights Movement with the rise of Nixon, there's a bipartisan consensus in American politics that's rooted in basically making capitalism not work for working class, middle class, or poor people, that is racialized in a way also to blame the fault of America on the rise or increased participation of Black people in American society. And that rhetoric is used to keep a shrinking of the pie going for 50 years, to the point where now we're talking about the crisis of capitalism giving birth to fascism in American society. And this is part of the result of this 50-year counter-revolution. So, and I agree with you, Jason, that the left has no grand narrative. And I'm not saying that I'm so brilliant that I can come with the proper grand narrative that we need. What I'm saying is that we need to create our grand narrative. And for me, that's my grand narrative. I think that's a large part of what my book is going to be about. That's going to be a large part of the overall. I think we need to discuss how we got here in a 50-year span of time and why we got here. And it's been largely bipartisan.
Now, and I guess what I'm thinking about too is that is it needed to structure, a positive, grand narrative of like a goal as well that we can currently fit ourselves in, and then see ourselves as a vehicle of change.
We need a hopeful narrative. And
okay, we need something that's not just analytically valuable, but something that. So in other words, the Republicans, the conservatives will use things like make America great again, shining city on the hill, or blah blah blah. But what I think the argument you're making, which is a very strong argument, right, is that too much. All of the left seems about critique and deconstruction.
Yes,
and not about building anything.
Right now, so when you think about like the movies that we have, and it's Brothers on a Saturday, and I went back down the 90s movie rabbit hole because recently I made a clip for a few-month-old discussion I had with Torrey Reed where we were talking about the Clinton 90s and the movies of that era that led us to the 94 crime bill. And it was a violent time with the explosion of crack. And I'm seeing people write locally about the explosion of crack, but their narrative is that kind of, if anything, the government sprinkled crack rocks in the ghetto, which isn't 100% true, right? Cocaine definitely got to flow in and out of the inner cities, but powder cocaine and turning it into a cheaper version is two totally different stories. And then violence happened. And we don't really talk about, well, there was no job market. Why was there no job market?
What were the steps that deindustrialized urban areas in a way in which made them open to become more attenuated to underground economies?
An underground economy that got to blow up, again, because of an influx of cheap cocaine, which turned young people into overnight American success stories. If we love watching mob movies over and over again because the narrative is bootlegging, then we need to kind of change the way we show these hood movies, because the hood movies came out telling the same story. Crack's a problem. It came out of nowhere, and brothers is just going to be violent.
Yeah, and well, I think that's like there's an issue between just white narratives and black narratives. Like the white narrative is something that can be placed into anything and seemed as good, right? Even if you're a bank robber or if you're an actual hero. But when it comes to the black and brown people, the narrative usually only is just going to serve one purpose. Where that the mobster can't be the mobster, which is actually something that's interesting. I was thinking about this last night because I just started watching the show on Netflix called Lupin.
Oh, how is that?
I haven't watched. Is that a British-based show?
French.
I love you turn the fucking captions off, Kevin.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. No, and I was thinking about that of the kind of like the reimagining of because it literally is the gentleman burglar is the like who this person but it's a black character, and yeah, it made me thinking kind of about what we're talking about right now, is that like now we are seeing that black people are now and it probably makes a difference that it was filmed in another country, but at least it's being sold, or at least seen here in the United States. But that kind of transcendence from the different narrative to where black people could just be in different roles. And let's say I think there's another show like Bridgerton. I haven't watched it, but it seems that that injection of people of color in all types of different roles and stuff like that is kind of helping to push against some of these stereotypical narratives that have been utilized.
I mean, there's some crack didn't just come out of nowhere. I'll say it again: an influx of cheap cocaine coupled with a newer usage in the late 70s, early 80s of freebasing cocaine. But to say the CIA came down to LA, Oakland, and New York, California, and said, check it out, young colored fellow, this is how you make some money, is a little silly. So I'm not saying that they weren't involved.
Are you familiar with Gary Webb's work talking about how, you're from the West Coast, I would assume you're familiar with Gary Webb's work talking about the correlation between America's Iran-Contra and Nicaragua exchange and financing of cocaine trafficways in exchange.
But they didn't create crack.
No, I'm not trying to make that.
The mechanisms to make it. People were already doing freebase cocaine. That's apparently what Richard Pryor was doing when he set himself on fire.
I'm gonna grab a drink while you argue with the chat.
Have our crack chat. Welcome to Crack Chat with. So I understand that the CIA did let the flow of cocaine come in. I can't deny that. But the narrative stops right there and becomes, well, the CIA put crack in the black community. I'm like, well, it's a little deeper than that. And if you stop the story there, then you get Boys in the Hood, and then you follow Boys in the Hood with the 94 crime bill.
I understand. I'm simply saying that I am not prepared to say that there was absolutely no role of government interference in terms of how an explosion of cocaine use exists in American society in the 80s, or heroin. A friend of mine wrote a very good book, an article talking about the Cold War and drug policy in American society.
Time out. Freebase and crack are designer drugs. How are they designer drugs? It's just synthesized cocaine.
This is not my area of expertise.
So this is it's just it starts to become some sort of like diabolical plot, and then you can fall down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory that the government wants to kill colored people. Like that's the end goal.
Which would be the easiest thing for the government to do if it wanted to do that, by the way.
Thank you. Like I don't need to go the long route of cocaine and heroin usage existed far before the 70s and 80s. Thank you. You know, cocaine was in Coca-Cola, and it actually was medicine. It's a numbing agent. So it's been around for that was freed slaves are a big reason why cocaine is illegal. Afraid these big Negroes who have been getting cocaine to work harder for all these years was going to go out and fuck people up. So I of course, I acknowledge the CIA was involved in the flow of cheap cocaine into the inner city. I'm never going to deny that. But I'm not going to sit here and say that the CIA sat there and go, you know what you need, see? Synthesize it down to its rock form. and that's how crack comes about. It's an explosion of because when we say that we deny the fact that there wasn't a job market that had been obliterated with deindustrialization and trade agreements that moved so many factories overseas. I mean, look at Detroit. You have this crack discussion. It's always LA and then maybe New York, but we always forget fucking Detroit.
I want you to check and look at this article that a comrade of mine wrote a couple of years ago. It's interesting how anti-communism fueled CIA drug trafficking.
Really?
Yes.
What was kind of the? What was kind of?
It basically talks about how Cold War era politics have a profound role in American intelligence allowing certain type of drug trade in the West and in the world in general. Maybe if I could put it, I should see if I could put it.
Well, I mean, that was like the whole Iran-Contra stuff anyway, right? Like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, Gary Webb didn't lie about the CIA being involved with the success of young freeway Rick Ross in LA getting boatloads of inexpensive cocaine and turning boatloads of inexpensive cocaine into a very large crack enterprise. And not just in California. I mean, he was doing shit in Kansas City and in St. Louis. And I want to say he even had operations as far as the East Coast. So saying the CIA have been assisting the business of drugs, if not also bag. So the chats are really flying in now. All you had to say was CIA and dope, huh? Had I would have known, I would have said it sooner.
Check out the chat. I just put the article in there.
Saying the CIA have been assisting the business of drugs, if not also bag holding large amounts of dope, is kind of like calling water wet. People like latching onto the conspiracy of CIA caused a crack epidemic leaves out way too many working pieces of that narrative that led to getting the 94 crime bill passed, such as local DEA, NARC, gang informants, FBI marshals, DOJ, and state AGs all working in unison, whether they knew it or not. Joe Biden had been trying to create a drug czar position to what it is now. He was trying to do that for years as a senator. And even Reagan was like, I think that's too much power for someone to have. And, you know, finally with the explosion of 86. And for me, I feel like the kickoff year is 86 because we have the death of Len Bias, which wrongly got attributed to a crack overdose. And then you get the 99-1 in 94. I believe it was like 20-1 before that. So the FBI and CIA are now apologizing, right? They've been on their apology tour for the last few years saying, we lied about the crack baby thing, guys. Marcus, are you old enough to remember the crack baby 2020 specials?
I mean, no, I wasn't. I wasn't. You know,
You were a crack baby.
Did you just call?
I was not a crack baby. Neither do I remember the commercials. Thank God my mom ain't watching this shit. So,
did you just call Marcus a crack baby?
Yes,
I think he did. On this 6th day of Black History Month, brothers calling each other crack babies is sad. We have not progressed as a people.
Was advertising crack, like advertising it like he was like, have you smoked this shit yet? Because I've been up all week.
I've been streaming, I've been podcasting a whole lot more. This stuff is great, man. This stuff is great. No,
hey, I don't know if there's anybody that has had a drug problem or a smoke crack. I'm actually a pretty square motherfucker, actually. But I definitely worked in shelters and with the homeless and grew up around a lot of drug addiction. And so one day I asked somebody, because the shelter I worked in was an emergency shelter. So it was a hotel. So everybody had their own personal fucking shower. And I was like, I remember asking one of the guys that I worked with that was a former addict. I said, why the hell, if you have your own shower, we give you soap. We will give you new towels. There's like no excuse not to take a shower. Why do cats still not take showers? And my boy looks over and goes, you might miss out. I said, miss out on what? He said, man, when you high, you up all night because you don't want to miss out. Blew my fucking mind. Blew my fucking mind when he said that shit.
I mean, damn. That's some shit right there. The boys must be fun. I don't know. I don't even know what to say to that. I got, you know, some homies that are fucking funny as hell, but like they ain't that funny.
Dude, it's the crack shit for me was a very frightening time because I grew up in a city called Richmond, California. If you watch the new clip that I have that'll be on Zero Books shortly with Torrey Reed, when I talk about being from Richmond, California, I literally put real pictures of where I'm from. And the crack shit, man, I had to dodge some bullets. My little brother, if you're watching, he had to dodge some bullets. Drive-bys were very regular. Watching people walk around like zombies really freaked me the fuck out. It was a wild time. I mean, Pascal, you were in New York in '86.
It got rough in New York in '86. It kicked off. I remember when crack initially started surfacing in New York in the mid '80s, and it was portrayed as an enticement to young kids who normally would not have been involved in drug dealing.
Yeah,
to deal drugs because it had a lower barrier of entry, right? Because you needed less money, to be able to start selling. And I vividly remember cats in high school, at the local high schools, talking about like, you know, this is going to be the new joint, the new way to make money.
It was like the scene in New Jack City.
No, it wasn't. I remember having a job, my first job when I was in high school, with cats who were just like in the local high school with me, and I was working, and I heard I remember conversations, and they're talking about like this is going to be like, you know, a way for cats to make money and blah blah blah, and they would talk, you know, it became known to me that they were talking about, you know, the rise of crack, and you know, it had a devastating effect on neighborhoods. There was a lot of violence. I remember the crack cocaine era vividly. I remember the horrible politics that came about as a result of it vividly. You know, I wasn't a kid. I was like a teenager and an adult watching this kind of development. And, you know, the reaction was, I mean, yes, were there segments of Black America that supported the crime bills? Yes, there were very very large segments that did.
Yeah.
But there were segments that didn't. The NAACP did not support the crime bill. Jesse Jackson did not support the crime bill. There were members of the Congressional Black Caucus who did not support the crime bill.
I
Jason,
agree.
you gotta put yourself on mute if you're gonna be reading the chat. You know what I'm saying?
I agree.
Cocaine Import Agency, CIA.
That shit was funny. I agree. I'm never gonna say they are not involved, right? I'm never gonna say that. Heroin's the same way. Someone said, what truth is there? Heroin was more male, but crack was more unisex female. I would say there's not much truth to it because, from my understanding and from my reading, heroin was one of the first times, and that really hit hard in the 70s, that people saw women no longer taking care of their children, and they were succumbing to the addiction as well.
For me, the larger importance of all of this, right, is that, you know, after the civil rights era, when segregation is over, all right, and, you know, the period of time where Black people are supposed to be able to actually allegedly participate in American democracy for the first time in history, allegedly, you know, they're smacked with epidemics of two massive drug forms that totally, you know, mass incarcerate whole segments of their society and just debilitate the social infrastructure of Black communities, to further make it unable for them to become functioning members of American society. And what I'm saying is that none of that happens without realizing that there is a requirement in American capitalism that Black people are reduced to surplus, redundant labor for the reserve army of labor. And that since we had more labor obsolescence because of deindustrialization, there were going to be more harsh mechanisms to push Black people down that hole. And drug use, addiction, and mass incarceration helped facilitate that process.
Now, if I could try again to, like, at least I want to ask you, you know, like what your thoughts are, like, I guess going forward, and as let's like see the politics around, around substances, around narcotics, around drugs, whatever you want to call it, where you see Republican states legalizing cannabis, some states decriminalizing all substances, but also too, you know, the cannabis industry growing in a manner that is just largely serving the same capitalist interests that had, you know, that led to the '94 crime bill. I don't know. I guess where do you see, like, I guess, like, how do you look to the future? You know, it's hopeful, not hopeful. You know,
I mean, I'm an advocate of legalization of cannabis because I believe in decriminalization of drug use, because I'm antagonistic to mass incarceration, right? And I think that if you actually neutralize the underground drug economy, I think and stop the illegality, you make it more difficult to function. But I mean, the larger question to me is that, like, unless we address how these drugs get into the country in the first place, and who has the actual tools and means to stop large-scale importation, which is the state, the federal government, we're not going to be getting into solving any of these problems, for me, you know. And so I would basically be more in favor of shutting down the underground drug economy as a means to stop, you know, the carceral state overall.
Diana Gwynn says that the drug epidemic is. I have to ask the question: if that's the case, then was prohibition intentional to kill Italian Americans? I got to ask the question. Italian Americans were killing each other at a rapid rate. Italian, Irish Americans killing each other very violently in the street.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know that. I'd have to, like, I think so I'm gonna admit ignorance. You know, I just have to say.
Is that why prohibition was illegal?
It seemed like prohibition was a reactionary or like maybe like a religious reactionary policy, and actually too is like some history. I know that there's that actually started in Maine.
Oh,
the first state prohibition for alcohol was in Maine, and so they actually pushed this Maine law. That's what they called, alcohol prohibition when and then eventually got passed federally. But I don't know, and like might have been.
But no, seriously, Pascal, do you think that just it's an intentional thing to just?
I think prohibition was about a cultural move by the United States elite to neutralize behaviors of immigrants that they found socially reprobate and try to force them into a certain kind of Anglo-American Protestant value system. Mm-hmm. And to also, I think a lot of it had to do with the growth of underground economies around beer production by German immigrants and other European immigrants that they wanted control of. I think that has a lot to do with why prohibition came about, because it didn't work, but I think there's a lot of deeper reasons behind prohibition.
But was it a plot to like kill and incarcerate Italian or immigrants?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, like that seems like we know we could go back and say that like immigrants of almost any culture or ethnicity have been demonized when they're first getting here.
But this is the thing, though. I don't think saying that drugs are a consequence of state action is the same as saying that drugs are brought into society to kill Black people. Mm-hmm. In other words, what I'm saying is that I think we should check out this piece from my friend, which is a very good piece. And
I have it linked up, and we can share it in a second. I want you to finish.
In other words, I am not saying. What I'm saying is that drug policy or facilitating drug importation by the U.S. government can have other nefarious motivations that end up consequently affecting Black people that may not be necessarily rooted in saying we want to.
Yes. Actually, and this is so. I think to deep make your point
is that drug policy can also be a consequence of intentional realpolitik in terms of how U.S. governance works on the international stage, and also subsequently result in death as well. It doesn't have to be either or. Just like there was an actual policy as to why prohibition was important to try to neutralize certain cultural behaviors amongst European immigrants, but at the same time, it also led to an increase in incarceration and criminal activity by organized crime amongst Europeans as well. So I don't think that they have to be mutually exclusive, but they don't have to be necessarily correlative as well. So my position is that, I don't think with a country that has over 800 military bases, that has, a 20 trillion GDP, you're going to tell me that narcotics gets to the United States accidentally. I don't believe that.
Yeah, no, and I think
when Diana even says a cocaine import agency, I agree with her wholeheartedly. I don't think there's any. I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I tend to start to break away when it becomes, well, it was all a plan, like you said.
Yeah, no, and I think that. Yeah, what you're saying is right. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be this or that. If you just look at the result, we can just deal with reality. Because and something I talk about law is like a lot is like when you talk about policy in a nutshell. If you were able to recognize the United States has systemic racism, right? This is not, and like liberals, Democrats, they will even, they will admit this, right? Systemic racial issues occur, in the United States. If you have any policy area that you want means testing, people got to jump through bureaucratic hoops, a lot of paperwork. All you're doing is saying, I want to give the policy, the possibility to inject racism into that person getting the whatever policy. So we can see this in the ACA, right? Where, hey, who is able to access healthcare largely versus who is not able to access healthcare. When you look at about it with drug enforcement policy, when you look about school education, whatever it is, right? At every chance, housing policy, there's another one. Even when they're given this the right language of, oh, we need to develop these programs where people can apply, that if you live in this zone and you're born of a certain person and this, that, and whatever, every one of those steps, you're injecting you're allowing white supremacy to creep in and then subjugate and then continue to oppress. And so when we even get to the drugs, it always doesn't matter if there is, right, the person behind the curtain, smoke filled room. It almost doesn't matter, because the result is almost if there is. And honestly, this is where it would make more sense. It would make more sense to me if there was an evil little,
It feels better, but we also have to someone wrote the word blowback. And I think maybe that's the term that we're not using here. Some of these results that we're dealing with are blowback from oops. Our government does not consist of people that are extremely fucking intelligent. This isn't the great and powerful
Correct. That is correct.
Curtain. They fuck up a lot.
All the time, every day they're fucking up right now.
A little loud here. They fuck up a lot. So we have to stop acting like there's this, like Pasquale said, sometimes they're just not that smart to see down the road 15 steps of what's going to happen. Or they just don't care. I think it could be a little bit of both, right?
I mean, with the crime bill, definitely both, right? And that's something I think that's the point, right? Of understanding that black politics isn't always good for black people, right? If you're actually looking at like who was pushing for
Marcus, you sound like you've been listening to me.
Man, once or twice. Hey, that's what I'm saying. Is like I think I don't even know if we're on yet, but after a while, because at first when it was like Jason would come in and say like, oh hey, there are black people that were pushing for the crime bill, and I'm like, yeah, but like there were other black people, and like my initial thing was like, yeah, but they knew better, right? There are enough right people in the room, but that next level analysis is the fact that it's like those two conflicting ideas where white supremacy gets to pick which black person to listen to, and then enact policy with the veil of black acceptance. Now we get to what you've been saying, and
if you believe that.
I mean, listen. Government. All right, listen. Have you heard of things like perfect example is that there was the hearings that came about in the 70s about CIA involvement in the media during the 1960s. The Church Committee.
Yes.
The Church Committee hearings. And the Church Committee hearings demonstrated that American intelligence had engaged in some rather nefarious psychological manipulation of American citizens using drugs, narcotics, to socially control them to engage in activity at the behest of American intelligence. Now, some people would tell you, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. Well, this is actually documented, a federal hearing in which we learn about things like, for example, a lot of people think, oh, this is a conspiracy. MK Ultra. MK Ultra is not a conspiracy theory.
It really happened.
MK Ultra was actually, I don't know, we can say is, but it was a program of psychological control used by the CIA to take individuals and use chemicals as well as various psychological tools to indoctrinate them into social control and behavior mechanisms.
How did that work out for him, though?
A lot of that did not work out for him.
That's my point. That's my point to Sister Gwen's point, is that this shit doesn't always work out the way we think it works out, because I think it's, when we go back to the whole narrative thing, that becomes the simplistic narrative to have, that there are people pulling strings and it's not your fault. This didn't happen because you actually have some ingenuity and you created a new market economy. This happened because this was all planned obsolescence by the government. Living inside of a homeless encampment showed me that you create markets when there is nothing else. I saw.
I mean, I don't disagree with that, but the thing is, though, creating markets are part of a systemic economic model, right? And I agree with you. And I mean, I'm not trying to say that, drugs only exist in capitalist societies. And what I'm saying is that the capacity to have underground economies works very effectively when you have an economy that's based on liberal free marketeering and gives the people the capacity to sell products that they can confine to specific areas and destabilize communities. So there's a consequence there's a correlation between having a capitalist society and the effectiveness to be able to create an underground market, particularly when you have a media industry that romanticizes the various types of cartels that we've had throughout history that have done the same thing. So what I think what's fascinating to me is that America will tell you how bad drugs and crime is, but America, since the advent of film, has always had a fascination with gangsters and criminals. You know what I'm saying? We've always had, the thug and the bad guy exists, in the American psyche as well as the good guy. And sometimes he is the good guy. So all I'm saying is that is part of the whole realism, ideological infrastructure of our society. And I don't think it's accidental. Again, I'm not saying that there are people sitting there saying, we're going to get little Johnny to try a little heroin now. No, I'm not saying that. What the larger point I'm saying is that what we do know is that there's got to be a fixed percentage of this society that is rendered surplus, redundant, and neutralized from functioning in American capitalism. We also know that to keep the system working, that percentage is racialized to be largely black and brown people disproportionately, but the majority are actually white. But because the perception is that they are black and brown, most of the whites who are the larger part of that perceptives never believe the system doesn't work for them. And what I am saying is that part of the mechanisms to keep that system in track is that you're going to have enticements to keep forcing those black and browns to stay at that surplus. And drugs and narcotics work as very effective enticements to help maintaining that surplus. That doesn't mean that you have to necessarily have someone saying, "Wah-ha-ha-ha." What that does mean is that creating underground economies of narcotics help facilitate the surplus redundant labor that keep American capitalism working.
And I think it's important also to note it's like that the idea of the free market might be the greatest myth capitalism ever sold. That's what allows people to believe, allows that great swath of lower class whites people to believe that they have a chance. That idea that if I work hard enough, I'll make it. That American dream stuff that they try and buy and sell. It's just false, right? It's it does not exist. And why? Because it is nations with the power of their own currency that creates markets, that decides what is allowed to be sold openly, how it is sold, where it is sold, the prices of it, the subsidies given to those corporations in order to produce those things. And so if we are able to now switch the focus, right now we are dealing with a completely corporatist government feeding into capital's desires. What's up, Phoenix? How do we then, what do we need to do to then just change the mindset? And that's, I think while we're all leftists, right, is to understanding it is it is the devotion to capital that now creates, these a lot of these issues, and at the very least keeps them going on and on and on. And I think healthcare, right? That's one of the easier ways. We used to have education, and as a fixture of hey, this is a public good. Roads and the highway system used to be seen as a public good. But all of these things now keep arguing against and against and against to where people are.
Does it go? Well, here I'll ask a question to the chat is actually, and I want to say this if I haven't said this already. I'm loving the chat right now. I constantly love it, but I love even people that don't agree with whatever the fuck I'm saying. This is just beautiful that we're having this conversation right now, and I appreciate y'all. I just want you to know that. So there's a great documentary by Adam Curtis, the British filmmaker, that's available now on YouTube. It's a 3-part series, about 3 hours long, called Century of the Self.
Excellent, man.
Edward Bernays.
Edward Bernays, the man.
And I'll figure out how I'll put a link to this when these Negroes get to talking some more. And if you take Century of the Self, which I think came out in the early 2000s, late 90s, and you take Johan Hari's book about addiction, there's some interesting points that they make when it comes to marketing and the switch in the 60s, the counterculture that definitely started to be about me and not about we. And you take that and you think about the rat experiment, the doctor that gave the rats, I think it was either heroin or cocaine, I can't remember off the top of my head, and one rat had heroin water, the other rat had regular water. The rat that had the heroin water kept going back and drinking the heroin, and that's where all that shit about heroin is the most addictive drug, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from that study. That doctor went back and looked at the environment that the rats were in. It's a mailman's truck. And my daughter bought my son a toy mail truck. Yes, mommy took the sticker off. And
service is a good example of a government entity that actually, serves the people, has a good purpose, and also is one of the biggest employers of black people that this nation's ever had.
Sleeping
and
with
veterans too.
Truck. He loved, my daughter just bought him this mail truck, and he just kicked the door in and said, "This is a mail truck." So sorry about that. But anyway, if you take that same doctor looked at the environment, the rat,
your local postal service, all right?
With cocaine, thank you, political. So cocaine. So he takes the rats and says their environment sucks. So the rats that have the cocaine water, other rats to play with, mazes to go through, an abundance of food, and he found out that the fucking rats weren't going back to the cocaine water, and none of them had died. So if you want to extrapolate that discussion into something bigger, I'm way more interested in having that conversation than one of
Jason. Did Jason freeze?
Yeah, he froze. I don't know if we're still.
I think we're still telegraph. We're still online. Jason froze.
All right, so we get to run the show now. It's just us.
No, we running the show. But
right, well, what do you want to talk about? We don't need to worry about what Jason wants to talk about. Now it's our show.
Was making a very important point about saying that the social environment from which individuals came can dictate the ability of them to be addicted to certain narcotics more so than the simple market of the narcotics being available in their proximity. And I can understand that. And I think that his larger point was that with the advent of drugs that starts to affect black communities in the 70s, it was largely more of a consequence of them already being in a socially and economically depreciated state that would make the capacity of them to be, exposed and use those drugs already more likely than the drugs being just shipped into their environment. So I kind of get.
Yeah, when like if there was any type of well, and like I think it depends on the drug, especially though it's like what he was talking about is like certain drugs get criminalized, and a whole other drugs get ignored. But no, yeah, if you insert any type of dealer on the corner of some gated community, that doesn't automatically mean that the Mercedes is gonna pull over and and get an ounce,
Right.
And that's where you see too. It's like a lot of use, or I'd say abuse of any substance. It just has to deal with a whole lot, like more so with escape of your material conditions, if only for a few minutes. And if people don't need to do that, then they won't.
I totally agree with you. This is interesting. So Jason got froze out. So I'm wondering if we should, because we've been on for a while. And we've coming up on a 2-hour show, which is so I'm wondering, for the sake of the pod, my question is, do we even have the capacity to turn off the pod?
I don't know. See, this is weird. So
his Wi-Fi is down.
So how is this like interesting for me? How this is even still going, or if he's using one computer that's like connected to the actual landline.
It's funny. He said his Wi-Fi his Wi-Fi is down. But my question is that how is the whole live stream still up and running?
That's what I'm wondering. Because if so, for my live streaming, if my stuff, like if it went down, like it's down. You're gone. Bye, everyone. See you next show. It's done.
Jason said he's on his phone right now watching.
But what is this? What's the stream? What is the stream on? He always can't type with his phone. He's gonna say "puss" about 8 more times. Well, and I mean, I don't know.
Paul Hammond is saying it's a coup. Pascal is taking over.
Yeah,
I mean, listen, okay. Well, Marcus, while I got you over here, let's talk about some other issues that's going on in current politics. Now, you and I were. Now, I understand that you were a staffer. You were a Hill staffer for a while.
Yep.
And now, what exactly do you think that is this fracas going on? There seems to be kind of a split in the left in terms of how exactly to treat and view the Squad and Ocasio-Cortez, and there's this big. I'm just becoming alive to this. I watched her Instagram where she talked about how she was triggered by the attack in the Capitol, and she disclosed that she was a sexual assault survivor. And there was an article in the New York Times that said she didn't lie about where she was in the house. And at the same time, there's some on the left who is saying that she's kind of trying to, make this about her and all. And I'm watching all of this back and forth. What exactly do you think? How do you perceive what is going on with the Squad, Ocasio-Cortez in particular? I know there's a whole other conversation about Jimmy Dore's fight for the vote on Medicare for all. I don't want to get into that because Jason and I have already kind of covered that territory.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding is that apparently she sent out a letter where she was asking her supporters to back her against what is supposed to be the right-wing threat to quote unquote like turn in hashtags that were allegedly trying to smear her. Like, she was asking her supporters to be a kind of thought police in a certain kind of way. And I'm like, well, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. So I heard about the letter. I didn't actually like read that letter. And I don't know. It's like everything. And so this is where like I'm actually happy to kind of like speak of my experiences and stuff like that, to give the broader, like, it's like the communications that goes on in politics. You're looking, especially as like with AOC stage, like you probably have 2 to 3 people, including the AOC as well, that are discussing how things go, how they sell, what is the political end goal of the message that's getting sent. As specific, with that, I disagree with it. I wouldn't send out messaging to constituents, and like that seems like you could easily do it by saying, hey, these are the things that people are utilizing to lie about me. It is kind of beyond the pale to then say, point this out, report this to Twitter, all of these things. but in the broader scope of it, not to go into the Jimmy Dore stuff, but overall, you've got the most popular figure in politics, that's not over 60, a very attractive woman as well, and so that's just going to draw, and the fact that she's Latina is going to add on another layer. So it's kind of like a intersection of like three kind of different issues. One, just political communications, but then the other of just, hey, simple racism and misogyny around a galvanizing figure. And this is where I wonder if I think Cori Bush is probably the next one. Like largely people are going to ignore Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, because they're Muslim and they like people who don't even want to even like raise that up at all. But Cori Bush is going to be the next, probably, where you see just simple racism and misogyny coming in forms of ridiculous arguments, and largely just serving just to split the left. Like this does no one really any good, because there's a faction of the left that is also feeding in. And this is something that me and Jason had talked about. It's like the dangers of talking about mixing with the Boogaloo Boys, and right wing, and trying to find solidarity on those ends. Like we talked about Fred Hampton and his coalitions that he built, and what the differences are, in which some of the people on the quote unquote left are trying to espouse. But yeah, I don't know. Like all of that kind of ties in. It's a very
right.
It's a wild time.
I mean, but so what you're saying is that you think that there is a certain kind of misogynistic antagonism towards her that's driving some of this criticism. Do you think that there are viable ways in which she can be and should be criticized by people on the left?
100%, absolutely, yeah. And the thing that here's where I still got the Bernie sign of, and with the left of, it's also a critique within itself. And this is something that with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez you could easily do, mostly on some of her messaging. I think specifically around like Venezuela, and some of the policies and foreign policy. But that's also fits into just the broader critique on the left that I hope that some of the things that we do at Left Flank are kind of able to highlight. But yeah, I think like when the left talks about foreign policy, and even just how much they talk about it, the lack of messaging around foreign policy, I think is an issue for the all politicians on the left. Whether you're talking about the squad, but like also Ro Khanna, he is responsible for a lot of good things, but I think he's missing. They're all missing the fact that once they start talking about ending the war in Yemen, and now they've got Biden to capitulate, the progressives need to be waving that flag of, hey, we did this for the broader public. But yeah, that messaging is rarely there, and that's something that, like for AOC and almost the rest of the squad, they're just missing a moment to fill a vacuum, to fill a good political vacuum as well, right? This is good policy. It's also good politics, because independents, they would very much coincide with anti-imperialist nature, and that's something too. As veterans, most veterans, if you start talking about ending wars, a lot of veterans will be behind that, and that's the kind of ways of building broad coalitions.
Jason, listen to the audience. Jason is saying that he will have to refresh his server to see if he can get back on here. If this kicks us off, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys are interested in seeing us come back, we may try to come back later on today. If not, we may have to end the stream here. But we've gone well over time. I'm appreciating the feedback from the audience. The questions in the chat are quite amazing. But, Jason is going to try to do something with his computer to try to get back on the stream with This Is Revolution. Because, frankly, I have no control.
Yeah, we're just in the plane as it's flying.
We're just basically just taking it.
Yeah, I do want to address while we still can, I guess, a question in the chat is like about AOC keeps herself as a focus, and I could like kind of understand that critique, but like at the same point in time, if we hey, let's just talk about being leftist, being respecting of people's labor, a lot of these streams and things that she's doing, this 9 p.m. This is her personal time. These are on her personal social media. If millions of people choose to tune in, is she not ever able to talk about her own experience, especially when people are storming the Capitol, focused on killing her? So this is where I think some things come into play, where people make arguments that I don't know. Is it too much focusing on her? Could she have used put it in the broader perspective? I don't know. Maybe. But at the end of the day, she's done, probably 10 hours worth of streams, of live streams in the past 2 weeks. So, I mean, I don't know. Some of these critiques is just like, what are you going to do? Yeah, if people care less of a personal experience, don't watch the streams. If you just want her legislative history, what she's doing on the Hill, just go to AOC.gov, whatever her representative website is. That's just going to be strictly business. But if you're saying that a person can't go on Instagram Live because they are a member of government,
I'm not buying into AOC as a victim. AOC needs to stop acting like a celebrity on Instagram. Do your job, Madame Politician.
And that's the thing is, once again, go to her website and you will see what she's doing daily. Just because she goes on her own personal platform at night, right? 9 p.m., 8 p.m. Now, so now my question would be, should she not be able to speak on her own personal experiences whatsoever just because a lot of people watch? That doesn't seem to make much sense either, but that seems to be like the end state of what they're advocating for, is that at no point should she be able to just go on Instagram Live and speak on her own personal experience as anybody else would be able to.
Why does it feel like Jason refreshed and it had no effect whatsoever?
I agree. It seems to be the thing.
Jason refreshed and it did nothing. The people need Medicare for all, and AOC dropped the ball. Oh, we're coming with the AFR with the little slogans now.
Yeah.
Slogans. Jason's like, I literally just turned my computer off. That's not really helping us narrate.
This is insane. I don't understand how this is technically possible. Yeah, and I think so, Diana, I would ask you to if you could please
refreshes and does nothing.
I would ask you to articulate, Diana, how AOC dropped the ball on Medicare for all. If you can articulate how she is responsible for it not happening. I thought that was. I mean, she said she dropped the ball, and I'm asking how that's possible. Because that's
referring to the force the vote fracas, which it was argued that they should argue to force the vote on whether or not support for Nancy Pelosi in her bid to become Speaker of the House in exchange for demanding a floor vote for Medicare for all. And people were basically, AOC and a few other of her acolytes.
Yeah. My issue with it is, though, these people admit that Medicare for all would not have been the end result. The whole idea of force the vote, they admit themselves that they just wanted to force the vote, and then it will fail. And then during, then you have the political swell to then force all of those people out. No one at force the vote headquarters actually believed that the vote was going to get us Medicare for all. And so if you're angry at AOC for not making that happen, you shouldn't frame it in a manner that says she is responsible for not getting Medicare for all whatsoever. That's not true. She did not.